had always trusted my husband. We built our lives together, shared dreams, late-night talks, even the mundane routines that somehow still felt like moments of connection. But somewhere along the way, things started to feel off. Little things, nothing that could have screamed betrayal at me. He'd become more distant, more secretive. His phone, which had always been his lifeline, was suddenly off limits. It wasn't the missed calls or the hidden messages that first made me suspicious, it was the feeling. You know the one, the nagging sensation in the pit of your stomach that you can't quite shake. But I pushed those feelings aside. Who was I to question him? He had always been so open, so reliable. I didn't want to be the paranoid wife, the one who's always looking for things that aren't there. But then came the moment I couldn't ignore. I was cleaning one night, putting things away in the closet when I noticed something strange. His second phone, I had never seen it before. It wasn't the phone he used for work, nor was it the one he always kept on him. I had no idea it even existed. The phone was tucked away in the corner, half hidden behind a stack of old files and papers. 1,000 thoughts raced through my mind as I stood there, staring at it. The logical part of me told me to leave it alone. It wasn't my business. But the curiosity, no, the fear, overpowered any reason. I had to know. I picked it up and turned it on. The password was simple, the same one he used for everything. I felt guilty as my fingers tapped the code. I knew I shouldn't be doing this, but I had to see for myself. I had to know the truth. The moment I unlocked the screen, I felt a cold rush flood over me. Texts, dozens of them, from someone I didn't recognize. The names, the words, the messages were so personal, so intimate, it was as if I had walked in on something I wasn't supposed to see. My heart started to race. I quickly skimmed through them, my stomach turning with every line I read. It was clear. He had been hiding something from me, something big. This was the truth I had been afraid of finding, the one I'd pushed away, convinced it wasn't real. But there it was, staring me in the face. And the worst part was, it wasn't the first time I had suspected something. It all made sense now. The late nights at work, the business trips that didn't quite add up, the secretive behavior. I had been blind, but now the blindfold had been ripped away. As I sat there holding the phone, I felt an overwhelming sense of betrayal wash over me. I wanted to cry, to scream, to throw the phone across the room, but all I could do was sit there, paralyzed by the weight of what I had uncovered. I had trusted him with everything, and now I was questioning everything. Where are you watching from today? Have you ever had a moment when the truth hit you like this? Let me know in the comments. I want to hear your stories. This was just the beginning. What would I do now? How would I confront him? What did this mean for our marriage? I didn't have the answers yet, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let this lie continue without fighting for the truth. The moment I found his second phone, everything changed. The words I had read on those messages echoed in my mind for days, each one like a jagged piece of glass cutting deeper into my heart. I knew what I had to do. I couldn't ignore it any longer. But at the same time, I was terrified. I had always imagined confronting him, asking for the truth, but now that I had it, I wasn't sure how to process it. I spent hours that night in a haze of thoughts, questions, doubts, pain. It wasn't the affair itself that hurt most. It was the realization that he had been lying to me for so long, pretending everything was normal while hiding the truth. I felt like I had been living in a world of illusions, and suddenly those illusions were shattered. When James came home that night, he was acting strangely. His usual casual demeanor was gone, replaced by a nervous energy I hadn't seen before. I didn't confront him immediately. I wanted him to tell me, to confess on his own, but I couldn't wait forever. I watched him, trying to gauge his mood to see if he would slip up. I needed to know if he would admit it first, or if I would have to lay it all out. I had never been a confrontational person, but in that moment, I realized I couldn't let fear hold me back any longer. I couldn't live in this limbo of suspicion. Around 10 p.m., as we sat on the couch together, the tension between us palpable, I couldn't keep quiet anymore. James, I started, my voice calm but steady, I found the second phone. His face went pale. It was the only reaction I needed to see. The look on his face told me everything. He had no idea I knew. I had caught him completely off guard. But instead of breaking down, instead of defending himself, he just stared at me, frozen. I know about Rachel, I added softly, each word hanging in the air like a heavy weight. He tried to speak, to form words, but nothing came out at first. He opened his mouth, closed it, then let out a shaky sigh. "I'm so sorry, Amelia," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I never wanted you to find out this way." I didn't say anything at first. I just let his apology hang between us. I wanted to feel the satisfaction of him owning up to what he had done, but instead I just felt numb. His apology, his regret, it all felt hollow. How could words repair what had already been broken? He kept talking, explaining how it started, how it had gotten out of hand, but the more he spoke, the less I cared about his excuses. I had already heard them all in my mind, long before he even said a word. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you come to me before this?" I finally asked, my voice shaking with emotion. "Why keep lying? Why keep this from me?" "I didn't know how to tell you," he replied, his voice cracking. "I didn't want to hurt you. I never wanted to hurt you." I wanted to shout at him. I wanted to throw his words back in his face. How could he say he didn't want to hurt me when everything he had done nothing but hurt me? But I stayed calm. I stayed quiet. I had already been hurt enough. What good would it do to keep rehashing everything he had done? Instead, I asked one simple question: "Do you love her?" The room went silent. For a long moment he didn't answer. His eyes shifted, avoiding mine, and that silence told me everything. I didn't need to hear the answer. I knew. "No," he said finally, his voice barely audible. "I don't love her. I never loved her. It was a mistake, a terrible, terrible mistake. I love you, Amelia. I don't want to lose you." I didn't respond. The words didn't matter anymore. The love I had once felt for him was still there, but it had been tainted. How could I ever trust him again? I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of everything that had happened in the last few days. I wasn't angry anymore, I wasn't crying. I just felt tired. Tired of the lies, tired of the secrets, and tired of the man I had married, the man who had betrayed me. Where are you watching from today? Have you ever been in a situation where you found out the truth you weren't ready for? How did you handle it? Let me know in the comments below. "I need some time, James," I said, my voice steady. "I need to think about everything. I need to decide what's next for me." He nodded, tears welling up in his eyes. "I'll do anything, Amelia. Please don't leave me." But I wasn't sure what I wanted anymore. The truth had come to light, but the damage had already been done. Now I had to decide, could I forgive him, or was this the end? The days that followed were a haze of emotion. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by a cold, relentless reality. I couldn't look at James without seeing the man who had betrayed me, the man who had lied to my face, the man who had shattered the trust we'd spent years building. And the worst part was I still loved him. But love wasn't enough to erase the pain. It wasn't enough to wipe away the image of him with Rachel. It wasn't enough to undo the deceit that had been creeping into our marriage, disguised as late nights at work, secretive phone calls, and whispered apologies that meant nothing. I spent a lot of time alone during those first few days. I didn't want to talk to anyone, didn't want to hear any advice. I wasn't ready for well-meaning friends to tell me I deserved better or that I should leave him. I already knew that. What I didn't know was if I could walk away. And what scared me even more was the realization that maybe, just maybe, I didn't know who I was without him. But one thing became clearer each day: I couldn't live like this. I couldn't keep pretending that nothing had changed. Every time I saw him, I couldn't forget what he'd done, and no amount of apologizing, no amount of promises to make it right would change that. So I made a decision. I asked James to leave. It wasn't an easy choice. In fact, it was the hardest thing I'd ever done. There were tears, there were words that we both regretted, but in the end I knew it was the only way forward. I needed space. I needed time to figure out if I could ever trust him again, if I could ever forgive him, and if this marriage was even worth salvaging. James didn't fight me. He left quietly, but I could see the pain in his eyes. I could hear the desperation in his voice as he promised he would do anything to fix it. But I didn't want to hear promises anymore. I wanted action. For the first time in months I was alone, and it felt strange, free but strange. The house felt empty without him, but the silence didn't feel as oppressive as I thought it would. It gave me room to think, to breathe, to feel. I started doing things for myself, things I hadn't done in years. I picked up my old hobbies, the ones I'd put on hold for our together time. I spent time with my friends, the ones who had supported me without question, the ones who had been there even when I hadn't realized I needed them. I went on long walks, letting my thoughts wander, letting myself heal. But the hardest part was still coming, telling my family. Where are you watching from today? Do you have a support system you can turn to in times of crisis? Let me know in the comments below. I want to hear how you found strength when everything felt like it was falling apart. When I finally told my parents, they were shocked but understanding. They had always liked James, always welcomed him into our family, but they saw the pain in my eyes. They didn't judge me for what I was going through. They didn't tell me what to do. They just offered their love and support, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the weight of the world lift just a little bit. I didn't have all the answers yet. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure: I was finally choosing me. And in that choice, I realized something profound. Even in the most painful moments, even in the darkest times, you can find your way back to yourself. I wasn't just a wife, a partner. I was an individual who deserved respect, trust, and love. And no matter what happened next, I wasn't going to lose sight of that. The weeks that followed James leaving were full of uncertainty, but also surprising clarity. I spent most of my time reflecting not just on the betrayal but on my life. Who was I without him? What did I really want moving forward? I realized how much of myself I had given away in the name of love, in the name of keeping things together. It wasn't just my marriage that had been put on hold, it was my own identity. My needs, my wants, and my peace of mind had all been second to his. I had spent so much time worrying about keeping him happy, keeping our life perfect, that I had forgotten how to care for myself. I had ignored the signs when my gut told me something wasn't right, choosing instead to trust without question. And now, sitting in the silence of our home, I was forced to face the consequences of that silence. But it wasn't just about what James had done. It was about what I had allowed. I realized I had been waiting for him to change, to fix the damage he caused. But the truth was, I had been neglecting my own growth. I had been waiting for an apology, for answers, when I should have been finding my own way. One evening, as I was sorting through some old boxes in the attic, I found a journal I had kept years ago, before marriage, before all the complications. It was full of dreams and hopes for the future. Reading it, I was reminded of the woman I used to be, the woman who didn't let anyone dictate her worth, who believed in herself and her ability to create the life she wanted. I had lost her, buried her under the weight of a relationship that had become more about obligation than love. But now I knew it was time to rediscover her. That was when I made the decision to move on, not just from James, but from the version of myself that had let fear and insecurity shape my choices. I filed for divorce. It wasn't out of anger or resentment. It wasn't even about punishing him. It was about reclaiming my life, my future, and my peace. The decision was painful, but it was necessary. It was the first time in a long time that I had done something just for me, something that would allow me to start healing. Where are you watching from today? Have you ever been in a situation where you had to let go of something or someone to take care of yourself? How did you move forward? Let me know in the comments below. Telling James was the hardest part. He had been gone for weeks, but when I finally told him I had filed for divorce, his reaction was predictable. He begged me to reconsider, saying he could change, that he was sorry, that we could work through it. But the truth was, I didn't want him back. I had spent so long waiting for him to change, hoping that he would be the man I needed him to be, but I had finally realized that I could be the person I needed all along. In that moment I let go. I didn't feel anger or hatred. I felt a strange sense of calm. I was ready to start over, to write my own story, and I wasn't going to let anyone else's actions define who I was anymore. The days following the divorce were still difficult. There were moments of loneliness, moments of doubt, and moments where I questioned if I had made the right decision. But with every day I felt stronger. I learned to embrace my independence, to find joy in my own company, and to rediscover my passions. I was building a new life, one where I was in control. In the months that followed, I found myself reaching out to friends and family I had neglected over the years. I went on solo trips, traveled to places I had always wanted to visit, and started new hobbies. For the first time in a long while, I felt free. Where are you watching from today? Have you ever taken the brave step to start over? Tell me in the comments. Your story might just be the spark someone else needs to take that step. James reached out to me a few times after the divorce, apologizing again, trying to rekindle some form of communication, but I knew deep down that our chapter was closed. I had taken back my power, and I wasn't going to let his mistakes dictate the rest of my life. I wasn't broken, I was reborn. The months after the divorce were the most transformative of my life. The silence between me and James became a constant reminder that I had made the right choice. Each day felt like a small victory. I woke up to my own decisions, my own life, and each step forward reminded me that I was in control of my happiness again. I had spent years living in uncertainty, constantly second-guessing myself, wondering if I was enough. But now, with every new experience, I felt more certain of who I was and what I wanted. I realized that I hadn't been living for me. I had been living for someone else, always putting their needs, their feelings, and their expectations above my own. And when I finally stopped doing that, I began to heal. One evening, after a long week of work and meeting new people, I found myself sitting in a park, watching the sun dip below the horizon. I'd been through so much betrayal, heartache, and the pain of rebuilding my life, but in that moment I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. I thought back to the woman I was before all of this, the confident, independent woman who wasn't afraid to chase her dreams. I had lost her, but she was still inside me, waiting to be rediscovered. And in this quiet moment, I realized she had never really gone anywhere. I had just buried her beneath the weight of a relationship that no longer served me. I began to truly embrace the freedom that came with being on my own. No longer did I have to explain my actions or seek approval. I started to put my own needs first, something I had always struggled to do. I took time for myself, rediscovered my passions, and finally started doing things I had pushed aside for years. Where are you watching from today? Have you ever gone through a moment of rediscovery where you found yourself again? Let me know in the comments. It wasn't long before I realized something even more profound. Healing isn't linear. There were still moments of doubt, moments when I questioned whether I had made the right choice. But those moments were fewer and fewer. They were no longer the loudest voices in my mind. I had found my own inner strength. Over time, I found myself looking at relationships differently. Not just romantic relationships, but all relationships. I no longer needed anyone else's validation to feel worthy. I realized that self-worth doesn't come from external approval. It comes from knowing that you are enough, exactly as you are. The best part. I learned to trust again, not blindly, but with the knowledge that I could trust myself. I wasn't afraid to open up to people again, but I also knew that I had the strength to walk away if anything ever felt wrong. And when James reached out again, a few months after the divorce, I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was just indifferent. His attempts to rekindle anything didn't make me feel like I owed him an explanation or even an emotional response. I was finally free. His actions no longer had power over my peace. "Amelia," he said one night when he called, "I miss you, I still love you. I want us to try again." I paused, taking a deep breath. I had to be honest with myself. I didn't want him back. I didn't need him to complete me. I had already done that on my own. "I've moved on, James," I said softly but firmly. "I've moved on not just from you, but from the version of myself I was when I was with you. I'm not who I was anymore." Where are you watching from today? Has there ever been a moment when you realized you had healed and you were no longer bound by the past? Share your thoughts below. I didn't need to hold on to the past anymore. I had healed, not because of what anyone else did or didn't do, but because I had chosen to rebuild myself. I had let go of what no longer served me, and in doing so I had made room for something better, something more meaningful. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving, and the future, it looked brighter than ever. The decision to finally walk away wasn't an easy one, but it was the beginning of something unexpected: freedom. It wasn't just about leaving James, it was about shedding the version of myself that had been tied to a life of secrecy, betrayal, and self-doubt. The silence, the distance, the betrayal had all been painful, but it had forced me to find my own strength, something I had buried for too long. The days after the final conversation with James felt both light and heavy. On one hand, I was filled with a sense of relief. I didn't have to wonder about him anymore. The constant cycle of worrying about his actions, questioning his words, and doubting his intentions was over. I could finally breathe without holding back. But on the other hand, there was a part of me that mourned what I thought was a life built on trust, a life I had believed in, even when the truth was staring me in the face. The weeks after the separation were spent rediscovering who I was, and more importantly, who I wanted to become. I signed up for activities I had always wanted to try, took spontaneous trips, and started engaging with people who respected my boundaries. I wasn't defined by my past anymore, and it was empowering. Where are you watching from today? If you've ever had to move on from someone or something that once meant everything to you, how did you find your peace? Let me know in the comments below. One of the most difficult parts of the healing process was reconnecting with people who had been there for me all along. When you're in a relationship, especially one like mine, it's easy to lose yourself in the dynamics. You start to hide parts of who you are because you're trying to protect the relationship. I had forgotten how to put myself first. But now I reached out to friends and family. I started to be present again, to engage without hesitation. I shared my story with them, not for sympathy, but for healing. And every time someone told me how proud they were of my strength, it felt like another layer of pain was lifted. I realized that the support I had from the people who truly loved me had been there all along, waiting for me to come back. But it was when I started reflecting on my future, on what I truly wanted, that I understood how much power I had taken back. I wasn't holding on to a broken relationship anymore. I wasn't defined by James's mistakes. I was, for the first time in years, just me. I had been scared for so long to admit that the relationship was no longer what I needed, but once I did, the weight lifted. I felt lighter, freer, and for the first time I wasn't scared of facing my own future. I started to explore new career opportunities. I was invited to work on projects that excited me, things I had put off because I was always too wrapped up in the drama of my marriage. The confidence I had been lacking returned, piece by piece, as I worked on becoming the version of myself I had always known I could be. Then came the unexpected part. Just when I thought I had everything under control, someone else entered the picture. Where are you watching from today? Have you ever been afraid to put yourself first after something painful, and then found new opportunities waiting for you when you did? Tell me in the comments below. A former colleague, Daniel, reached out to me. We had worked together briefly before my marriage had started falling apart. At the time, I had been too distracted by my personal life to truly connect with him. But now, after everything I had been through, I saw him in a different light. Our conversations started casually, but over time we shared more about our lives. Daniel had gone through his own personal challenges, and we quickly bonded over our shared experiences. It wasn't about romance or rushing into anything new. It was about finding someone who understood the importance of self-healing and growth. And for the first time in a long time, I felt comfortable with the idea of opening my heart again. It wasn't about replacing James or trying to find a quick fix to my heartbreak. It was about understanding that life could still hold beauty, even after everything had fallen apart. And I realized that this new chapter was not about filling a void. It was about sharing experiences, learning from each other, and taking things at a pace that felt right. James still reached out occasionally, but each time I felt less and less connected to the man he had been. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. I just knew that I couldn't go back to a life where I was second-guessing everything. Where are you watching from today? Have you ever found healing in the most unexpected places or people? Share your journey with me in the comments below. The future was no longer clouded by the past. I wasn't defined by the hurt I had experienced. I was building something new, something that was all mine. I had rediscovered my strength, my independence, and my peace, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away again. It's funny how life works. When everything falls apart, you feel like it's the end. You think you're drowning in all the pain and confusion, but slowly, as you start to rebuild, you realize that it's just the beginning of something new, something you couldn't have imagined if you hadn't gone through the worst of it. As time passed, I found myself becoming more confident in who I was and what I deserved. The betrayal, the heartache, the silence, it had all shaped me, yes, but it didn't define me anymore. I had learned to stand on my own, to listen to my instincts, and to trust my worth. After everything had unfolded, I had made a choice, not just to walk away from my marriage, but to choose myself. I hadn't thought about it at the time, but choosing myself was the most freeing decision I had ever made. In the months that followed, I focused on building my life again. I found my passions, my hobbies, and reconnected with friends and family who had always supported me. I had spent so many years putting others first, neglecting my own needs and happiness, but now I was learning how to put myself back at the center of my own life. And then there was Daniel. Our friendship had grown steadily over time. We had shared experiences, supported each other, and spent hours talking about our dreams and goals. It wasn't rushed, and it wasn't about filling a void. It was simply two people who had both been through difficult times, now learning how to move forward in a healthier, more honest way. One night we were sitting at a cozy cafe, sharing stories of our past and the lessons we had learned. I was starting to realize how much peace I had found in this new connection, in taking things slow and building trust again. "Amelia," Daniel said softly, his eyes warm as he looked at me, "I just want you to know how much I admire you. You've been through so much, but the way you've turned everything around, it's inspiring." I smiled, feeling a warmth in my chest. I hadn't expected to hear those words, not after everything. But in that moment, it felt like everything was falling into place. I had been so afraid of what might happen next, of whether I could ever love again or find happiness outside of the pain. But sitting across from Daniel, I realized that life was not about rushing to fill empty spaces. It was about taking the time to heal, to grow, and to trust that the right things would come when you were ready. I never thought I'd be here, I said, my voice soft. I thought I'd be stuck forever in the hurt, in the questions, but here I am, stronger, happier, and in a place where I'm not defined by what happened. Daniel nodded, his expression understanding. You deserve all the happiness in the world, Amelia, and I'm so glad to be a part of this journey with you. In that moment, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. This wasn't a fairy tale, and it wasn't about getting everything back to the way it used to be. It was about starting fresh in my own way, on my own terms. Where are you watching from today? Have you ever experienced a moment when you realized you had healed and that your future wasn't tied to your past? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your journey. James still reached out occasionally, still sent messages apologizing, still trying to connect, but each time I felt less and less like the woman who had been crushed by his betrayal. I had built something new, a new sense of self, a new life and new possibilities. As much as I once believed that my future was tied to him, I now understood that my future was in my hands. It wasn't about holding on to the past or trying to make it right with him. It was about moving forward, learning, and growing into the person I had always been meant to be. The months that followed were filled with self-discovery and healing. I had spent so long trying to fix something that was broken beyond repair, trying to salvage a marriage that wasn't meant to be. But now, I was learning to rebuild piece by piece, and I wasn't doing it alone. I had my friends, my family, and even new connections like Daniel, who had become an anchor in my life. But there were still moments of doubt, moments when I questioned everything. Could I really trust again? Would I ever be able to open my heart to someone else without fear of betrayal? These questions lingered, especially when James tried to re-enter my life. He would send messages here and there, asking how I was doing, apologizing again for everything he had done. There were days when I almost considered talking to him, but I always stopped myself. It wasn't because I hated him. It wasn't because I didn't still care for him in some way. It was because I knew I wasn't the same person I had been when I first married him. That woman, unaware, trusting, blinded by love, no longer existed. In her place was someone stronger, someone who had learned that self-worth wasn't defined by someone else's actions. It wasn't defined by the approval of a man who had failed to appreciate her. It was defined by the respect I gave myself. One day I received a letter from James. I hadn't heard from him in weeks, and this time the tone was different. He wasn't asking for forgiveness anymore. He wasn't begging for another chance. He was simply saying goodbye. He thanked me for the years we had spent together, and he apologized again for the hurt he had caused. It was the final piece of closure I had been waiting for. But what struck me most was the last sentence of his letter. I know now that you were always the one who deserved better. You were right all along. I'm sorry for not seeing that sooner. That was it. It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't a dramatic reunion. It was just a letter, simple and honest. But in that moment I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It wasn't the closure I expected, but it was the closure I needed. James was no longer a part of my story, and I was finally ready to move forward completely. Where are you watching from today? Have you ever received closure in an unexpected way? Or perhaps found peace without the answers you thought you needed? Let me know in the comments below. A week later I ran into an old friend from college. We had lost touch over the years, but when I saw her it felt like no time had passed. We grabbed coffee and caught up on life. She asked me about my marriage, and I shared a little of what had happened, enough to explain but not enough to dwell on the past. And as I talked I realized something profound. I was finally free of it all. I wasn't defined by the hurt anymore. I was just me, and that was more than enough. I had learned to love myself again, to trust myself again, and to believe in the possibilities of my future. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the weight of the past on my shoulders. The road ahead was open, filled with potential, and I was ready to walk it alone, stronger and more capable than ever before. James had been a part of my journey, but he was no longer my story. I was the author of my own future now.